Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we are setting the stage for what could honestly be the most unprecedented high-stakes cyber heist narrative in human history. We're looking at a fascinating, newly released white paper from Google Quantum AI. And look, we aren't just talking about abstract cryptography here. We are talking about a very real, ticking clock for the entire foundation of digital ownership. It's a massive question, isn't it? What actually happens when a quantum computer cracks the blockchain? For a long time, the threat of quantum computing breaking modern encryption was kind of treated like a distant sci-fi theory, something for future generations to worry about. But the data we're going to look at today frames this not as some distant possibility, but as an imminent threat to literally billions of dollars in digital assets. Just listen to this incredibly powerful quote from the April 2026 white paper. Quote, "The expected emergence of cryptographically relevant quantum computers will represent a singular discontinuity in the history of digital security." A singular discontinuity. That is a highly objective academic way of saying that the rules of the game are about to completely break down. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The quantum computing threat and our shrinking safety margin. So researchers at Google Quantum AI have published some startling new math. When you plot out the logical resources required to break the core cryptographic algorithm used by Bitcoin and Ethereum, we see this dramatic reduction in what's actually needed. We're now down to just 1,200 logical qubits and 90 million Toffoli gates. Now, for those of us outside the quantum lab, what that basically means is the hurdle to pick the digital lock is suddenly much, much lower than anybody anticipated. And here is the truly shocking figure: 9 minutes. The paper estimates that a superconducting quantum computer using fewer than 500,000 physical qubits could crack the core of modern blockchain cryptography in just 9 minutes. That isn't years. Actually, scratch that. It's not even days. That is literally minutes.
Section 2. How quantum attacks work, or the mechanics of a heist.
The white paper introduces a really critical distinction between two technological paths here: fast clock architectures and slow clock architectures. Fast clock machines, think superconducting or photonic computers, can execute operations incredibly rapidly, allowing them to strike in mere minutes. Slow clock machines, which use neutral atoms or ion traps, take significantly longer. And this distinction is totally vital, because the speed of the machine determines the exact type of heist the attacker can actually pull off.
First up, let's look at what the paper calls an on-spend attack. This is your lightning-fast heist. When you send cryptocurrency, your transaction sits in a public waiting room called a mempool before miners process it. Well, a fast clock quantum computer could intercept that transaction in transit, read your public key, use quantum math to derive your private key, and write a brand new forged transaction to steal your funds. And they can do all of this before your original transaction even clears.
Now contrast this with the at-rest attack. This is a much slower method, one that even the slow clock machines can pull off. Here, the attacker isn't racing a live transaction. Instead, they're targeting funds sitting dormant in wallets where the public key has already been exposed to the network. They can take days, weeks, or even months to pick the lock, and the owner wouldn't suspect a single thing until their funds suddenly vanish.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact problem. If you compare that 9-minute quantum attack time against average block processing networks, you'll see a vertical dashed line marking the key derivation completion. Basically, if the network hasn't processed your transaction by that 9-minute mark, the quantum attacker wins the race. The math here is terrifying. Because Bitcoin averages a 10-minute block time, an on-spend attack has nearly a 41% chance of successfully stealing funds from a standard Bitcoin transaction right out from under the sender. It's essentially a coin flip on whether your money reaches your intended recipient or a quantum hacker.
Moving on to Section 3, vulnerabilities in major blockchains. Who is actually exposed? Breaking down the vulnerability by script type, just look at the top row. Older pay-to-public key scripts, and, ironically, the brand new Taproot upgrade, directly expose your public key on-chain. So they're completely vulnerable to both at-rest and on-spend attacks. The bottom row shows standard modern addresses, which hide the public key behind a hash. Now, these are safe from the slow at-rest attacks, but there's a catch. If you ever reuse that address, your key is exposed and you are entirely vulnerable all over again.
So, what about Ethereum? Well, the paper points out that Ethereum has a pretty unique quantum posture. Because its blocks are processed in 12-second slots, it essentially thwarts those 9-minute on-spend attacks completely. However, it is definitely not totally out of the woods. Ethereum's massive, complex smart contract ecosystem, along with its proof-of-stake consensus mechanisms, create entirely different systemic vulnerabilities that could be targeted offline by quantum computers. Check out the rapid expansion of the orange and dark gray areas in this data. Those represent the massive adoption of modern, weight-efficient cryptographic scripts like Taproot. While these upgrades are super popular for scaling the network, the researchers note they inadvertently reintroduce those dangerous exposed key vulnerabilities of the past. It's a classic security regression.
Section 4. The dormant asset problem. Ghost ships on the ledger.
Now, what's really interesting here is this concept of ghost ships drifting on the blockchain. Notice the shaded regions on this timeline of the total Bitcoin supply. Those areas represent a staggering 6.9 million Bitcoin just sitting in addresses where the public key is known, waiting to be cracked. And of that total, an incredible 1.7 million Bitcoin are locked in highly vulnerable legacy P2PK scripts. A huge portion of this is Satoshi-era mining rewards from the very earliest days of the network. These original wallets have never moved. Their keys are fully public, and they represent this massive, glittering prize for the first person to turn on a sufficiently powerful quantum computer. Looking at the balances of the top 100,000 vulnerable addresses, we see a sheer concentration of wealth at risk. And it's not just forgotten early miners either. This list includes massive holdings from major cryptocurrency exchanges. Why? Well, because for businesses processing millions of transactions, reusing addresses is incredibly convenient. But that convenience completely strips away their quantum protection.
Which leads us to a fascinating core paradox. Even if the active blockchain community collectively agrees to upgrade their security tomorrow, dormant wallets cannot be patched. If the owner lost their private key a decade ago, they can't migrate to a new standard. Those abandoned wallets remain a fixed, multi-billion-dollar target that will permanently reside on the ledger until a quantum attacker inevitably drains them.
Section 5. The Post-Quantum Escape Plan. Surviving the Heist. The white paper outlines a very clear defense plan. Immediately, users and exchanges must stop reusing public keys. Done. Secondly, the networks must begin the technically grueling process of migrating to post-quantum cryptography, or PQC. But the most fascinating proposal here is the concept of digital salvage. To prevent rogue actors or hostile states from claiming those multi-billion-dollar ghost ships, the paper suggests establishing a regulated legal framework to systematically recover or even burn dormant assets before the quantum hackers can get their hands on them.
So the crucial point is summarized perfectly by the authors themselves. Quote, "We urge all vulnerable cryptocurrency communities to join the migration to PQC without delay. They are loudly sounding the alarm. The finish line for building a quantum computer might still be a bit blurry, but the math proves the threat is rapidly approaching."
Which leaves us with one final, very provocative question. Will the decentralized blockchain community manage to reach a consensus and upgrade their defenses before the quantum clock runs out? Or will we literally witness the greatest heist in human history play out live on the public ledger? It's a race against time for sure, and the stopwatch is already ticking. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your focus sharp, and I'll see you next time.